Baruch Hashem, today's daf yomi is Avodah Zarah daf mem gimel Avodah Zarah 43. We're going to start on the bottom of mem beis and mem beis. Today's daf dedicated for Shmir for the Chayalim Matzah for the Shuyim and Yeshua for Am Yisrael. Mara says in today's daf yomi around 15 lines in the bottom on 42b that Man Kid Rav Sheshes Chumrei Mas Naisa. The Rav Sheshes used to take the most challenging braisos, and he would try to understand them. Tani, and he taught Kol Mazolos Mutarin, all the constellations of the sky are permitted, Chutz Mazel Chamo V'Havana, except for the moon and the sun. And we'll see what that means. The second part of the brayso says Kol Partzuf and Mutarin, all faces are permitted, Chutz Parts of Adam, with the exception of the face of a man. And the third statement to the brayso says, "Kol tzuros mutaros," all the forms are permitted, chutz mitzuros darkon, with the exception of the form of a snake. So what does this mean? Let's analyze it. Amar ma kol mazolos mutaron, all the mazals are permitted, chutz mazel chamo vana, except for the moon and the sun. So what is this referring to? It means to make it. It can't be. You're not allowed to make the constellations. It says in the pasuk, you cannot make me. Can't make you can't make the images of those that serve me in the heavens. Ela pshita b'motze. It means what we're talking about here is where you find it. If you find it drawn on a utensil, it's prohibited. Like I said in our Mishnah, if you find a utensil and there's a moon and the sun drawn on it, you have to throw it into the sea. So it's talking, the first scenario is talking about motze, where you find it. The Gemara then says, "Iba motze, ima mitziyasa." What's the middle case? Koa partsufos mutarn. All the faces are permitted, chutz mi parts of Adam, with the exception of the face of a man. Even motze, if you find it, parts of Adam, you find it written on the drawn onto a utensil, parts of Adam miyasar, is it prohibited to draw the face of a man? Matanana motze kelim, alayim tzuras chama, tzuras lavana, tzuras darkon. If you find the moon or a sun or a snake drawn on the side, you have to throw it into the sea, which implies tzuras darkon and parts of Adam. Oh, it implies a snake, yes, but not a man. A man you can use if you find it on the side of a utensil. Now, pshita ba'oseh, so it's referring to making it, that you can't make the image of a man. And so then the Gemara said, and ukidarav, Hunabraid Rav Yeshua, like Rav Yeshua taught, as we'll see later on today's stuff, that you know how to make the image of a man. And so the Gemara then says, Iba Oseh, if you're talking about a case of making it, Hima Sefer, what's the next clause? That all the forms are permitted except for a snake. Dark, the oset tzuras darkon mi also, is it prohibited to make the form of a snake? You know how to make me honey in tzuras darkon low, or on top of mem gimel. It just refers to gods of silver and gold, but there's no prohibition to make a snake. So the last case is, where is the snake permitted? Where you find it drawn on a utensil, we assume it was worship. And also tzuras darkon. So the Gemara says, you mean to say Reisha the Sefer of the Motze, the first clause, which is about the sun and the moon, and the last clause is talking about the snake. First, where you find it drawn on the side of a utensil, and the middle case is where you make it. Is that really possible? That's what we're referring to. Reisha the Sefer of the Motze, Mitziyasa ba'ose. The first clause and the last clause is where you found it, and the middle clause is where you make it. Rava said a different answer. Rava Amar Kua Motze Umitziyasa. So Rava says Kua Motze, that all three cases are where you find it. And so if that's the case, so why, if you find an image of a person, is it prohibited? Our Mishnah didn't say that. So Rava explained to me, Tziyasa is following the Braises, Rabbi Yehuda. He did Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda, Mosif, Optimus, Menika, Mesar Apis. Rava says, Rabbi Yehuda added, in the Brisa, the image of a nursing woman and basically a sar apis, which is a man with a measuring utensil. So that's also prohibited, and that's what refers to a face. So Manika al Shem Chava, Shemanika al Kolam Kolo, that the nursing woman is drawn there to demonstrate Chava, that she nursed the whole world. And Serapis al Shem Yosef, Shasaru Mephisis Kolam Kolo, that Joseph sustained the whole world. V'hu dinaka Geria v'Kayal v'hi dinaka Ben v'Kamanika. And it's talking about a case where if it's the Serapis, he's holding the measuring tools, and if it is the nursing woman, she's holding a baby and nursing. So that's when it says the face is prohibited. If you find it, if it's the face of a nursing woman or a bureaucrat like Joseph. So the Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan Ezu Tzuras Darkon. What are these forms of the snake bush? If you find them drawn on the side of utensil, they're prohibited. Pirish Rashba, Kol Sheishlo Tzitzin, Bein Purakov. Any snake that has fins on its back, between the like rings. Papa Bein Pirkei Tzava, between the rings on the neck. The law is like Reb Shimon ben Elazar, who taught this halacha that as long as it has the fins on the back, that's when it's prohibited. One time I was walking after Rebbe Elazar Kapar, the great rabbi, on the journey. And there was a ring there. On this ring was a snake, a form of a snake. And he found I found a minor idolater. I didn't say anything to him. I found an adult one. I said, nullify the idolatry. I didn't do it. But then I slapped him, and after I slapped him, he nullified it. Shmamina tlas. We learned from here three things. Shmamina oli kochavim mevata avodas kochavim shalo v'shel chavero. The first thing we learn is an idolater can nullify not only his own idolatry, but also the idolatry of his friend. He has the ability to nullify any idolatry that he comes upon. And the second thing we learned is Shmamina Yodea B'tiv Shavot Chom Shamshem Avatel. Shenu Yodea B'tiv Avot Chom Shamshem Avatel. And you can only nullify it if you understand the idolatry. If you're an adult, he didn't nullify it with a minor because he needed to understand it. And the third thing we learn is Shmamina Oli Chom Avatel Bal Karcho, that the idolater can nullify it even under duress. Even under duress, he can nullify it. So the Gemara says, Megadif Rabbi Chanina was astonished. I don't understand. What about the fact that we learned in this price, they're taking us back to Elam Metzius, that it says there, Matzo min Arim, min Adov, min Anavar, min Agayas, min Anar, Mizuta Shalyam, Mishula Shal Nar, Vamotzi Besarati Poati Gdov, Kol Mokachar Mitsuim Shemareo Shalom, and Meshabal Mesiashemehen. That if you find something, that if you find it, you find basically something in the sea or in all of these places, which we're talking about here, you save an object from a lion, from a bear, from a leopard, from the army, from the river, from the sea, from the banks of the river. We find it in the street, and any place where the people are, it's going to be his because the owners have given a pope on it. And so too also over here, we assume that since the person gave a pope without ever giving his ring back, so he's not going to worship anymore. So the idol is nullified because he's not going to worship anymore. So why does it still need nullification? So yeah, he gave up hope of getting it back, but he never gave up hope. He's still going to call it idolatry because he's still going to call it an idol because he'll say, he says if an idolater will find it, he'll worship it. And if a Jew will find it, since it's expensive, he'll sell it. So, and he'll worship it. So he's saying, I gave up hope of ever getting it back myself, but it's still an idol. So now, Tanan Hasam, we learned in the Mishnah, this is the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, Rabbi Gamliel had forms of the moon in his attic. Rabbi Gamliel had forms of the moon in the attic. Bitavwa Bikosel Shebahen Mareh Sejotos. He had it on a board on the wall that he would show the people who came in to testify about what they saw. He'd say, do you see something like this? or like this. So the Gemara asks the question, Mishari, how was Rabbi Gamliel able to have these forms of the moon? Well, doesn't that mean Lutasun kidmut? Shimshi, I'm a Shamshofana. You're not allowed to make the forms that serve me. And so therefore, how could Rabbi Gamliel make this new moon, make these moons? So I'm Abaye. So the Gemara is going to give 5 answers to this question. First answer is Abaye says, Torah, now, when the Torah says it only prohibits those things that serve God that you can make them exact replicas, like those in the temple courtyard. But those that serve God above, but you can't make an exact replica, that would not be prohibited. So that's the first answer to this question. So the first answer to this question is, how could Rabbi Gamliel make the moon? The moon wasn't prohibited because the only thing that was prohibited was to make an exact replica of the items that serve God, which are in the courtyard. But you're obviously not making an exact replica of the moon. And how do we know that you can't make the items that are in the courtyard of the temple or in the bottom of 43a, around 6 lines to the bottom? Because it's telling you, like it states, you're not allowed to make a room that's the size of the base of Mikdash or Achsadra, Tavnis Uam, or an antechamber, and the exact dimensions of the antechamber of the temple, or Chatzir, Tavnis Azara, or a courtyard that's like the courtyard of the temple, or Shulchan, Tavnis Shulchan, or Menorah, Tavnis Menorah. You're not allowed to make exact replicas of the items in the temple. That's reserved for the temple. And so this is what this verse refers to. But you can make a menorah of Shalhei v'Shalvav. You can make a menorah of 5 branches or 6 branches, v'Shalches, v'Shal Zayin v'Yaseh afil Shal Shar Minei Matachot. So you can make one of different numbers of branches, except not of 7. And you can't make it of 7, even of other types of metals. And I think the menorah is made out of gold, so therefore you can make it out of silver. So Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says, Av shel eitz lo yaseh. Can't even make it out of wood. Kederach she'atzu beis chashmonai. Because the Hasmoneans made their menorah out of wood. Look, Rashi explains. Asur b'mikdash shel eitz. They made their menorah in the temple out of wood. After the Yevanim defiled the sanctuary and they took all the utensils, and then the Chashmonaim came and defeated them, they made a menorah out of wood. So, and that's what Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda is saying, that you also can't make the menorah out of wood. Amar Misham Raya, you're bringing me a proof from the Chashmonaim. That's not true. Shpudin shel barzel hayu v'chofim b'batz, that they had the Hasmonaim did not make their menorah out of wood. They made it out of metal. They first covered it with lead. Had shira asim shel kesef. If they got richer, they did it of silver. Chazor shira asim shel zahav. So, and in the end, they made it out of gold. So anyway, but the point of this is that this verse, the question was, Rabbi Gamliel says, how did Rabbi Gamliel make the images of the moon to show the people when we said, you can't make forms of God? So the first answer is no, that doesn't refer to making the forms of the moon. It refers to the exact replicas of the temple. So the Gemara says, wait 1 second. They're really permitted to make these things that serve God that are impossible to replicate exactly. Tanya, is it really prohibited? I mean, is it really permitted? This verse refers to those who serve God up in the heavens. And that's not the items of the temple. That's in the heavens. And therefore, a second answer. Amar Abaye, second answer to this question of how did Rabbi Gamliel make the moon? So he says, top of 43b, Lo Asra Torah El B'Dimut Dalet Panim Bahadei Adadi. So what's prohibited? Only to make an image of the 4 faces that are on the chariot of the throne of God, as seen in the vision of Ezekiel, if they're together. So that's Abaye's second answer. And so therefore, the moon was permitted. Those 4 faces, what are the 4 faces? Rashi tells us, reminds us It's the face of the shore, the ox, the man, the lion, and the nesher, and to make them as one. So the Gemara says, you mean to say, parts of Adam Tishri, according to the second answer of Abaye, it will be permitted to make a face, a human face by itself, because it's only permitted to make the four faces together. Alama Tanya, why does it say parts of Adam? Why does the Brisa say all the faces are permitted except for the face of a man? That's what we had on the previous, on 42b at the bottom. It said all the faces are prohibited except for the face of the man. Now, remember we said at the top of 43a that this was a dispute between Abaye and Rava. Abaye says it refers to one who makes it, and Rava says it refers to one who finds it. But anyway, we see from here that according to Abaye, one who makes it's prohibited. And here we're saying, and this answer is given according to Abaye, and here we're saying that face is permitted, but Abaye said earlier was prohibited based upon the Brisa. So I'm Rav Yehuda, Braid Rav Yeshua mi. He said, I heard an answer from the teachings of Rav Yeshua, Wotasun iti, Wotasun oti. So this is the third answer. It says, what does it mean, Wotasun iti? Can't make me, Aval Shar Shamashim Shari. So according to this approach, you can make all the other things that serve God. You just can't draw an image of God. What's the image of God? The image of God is a human being, meaning to say you can't draw the form of a human being because that's the way I appeared to the prophets. So you can't, there's a prohibition to draw a human, and also the other, but the other elements that serve God are permitted. And so therefore the moon and the sun is permitted. Gemara says, the Shara Shamashim Mishari, you mean the moon is permitted, the other Shamashim. Vatanya, Otasun Oti, Otasun Iti, Otasun Kumut, Shamashayim Mishamsham Fane, Bamaram, Kigon, Ofanim, Misrafim, Vachayas Akodesh, Vachayas Sharis. Says specifically not just the human face, but also the other items that are up in heaven. So if that's the case, we see that the other Shamashim are also prohibited. So it says Abaye, another answer. The only thing that's prohibited are those shamashim that are in the upper heaven. There's an upper heaven and a lower heaven, like those angels. So, but the ones in the lower heavens, like the moon, is permitted. Mary asked the question: in the lower heaven, is it permitted? It says you're not allowed to make the image of God that is up in the heaven. It says, Asher Bashamayim. So what does that come to include? It includes the sun, the moon, the stars, and the sky. So it says explicitly you cannot make the moon. So Mar explains, Kitanya Hilo Dam. Now that Bryce is referring to worship them. That when you make them to worship them, that's prohibited. You cannot worship them. So the Gemara says, well, if it's to worship them, you can't even worship a worm. Of course you can't worship them. So the Gemara says, in Achinami, we say for the Kranapa. Yes, the Gemara says you're correct, but the end of the verse, this idea that you can't make them is learned out from the end of that verse, because the end of that verse says the Tanya Asher Ba'aretz says in the land the Rabos Yamim Naharos Armuvos. That includes you're not allowed to make the seas, the rivers, the mountains, and the hills. Mitachas Rabos Shol Shol Katan. That you're not allowed to worship even a small worm. Nasia Gredasa Mishari. So you mean to say that verse is saying that you can't worship. Okay, you can't worship anything, but you would be allowed to make the moon and this the images that serve God. Is that really the case? You're not allowed to make the moon, the sun, the stars, and the sky. So we see you're not allowed to do it. So how is Rabbi Gamliel able to do it? So the Gemara says, Shani Rabbi Gamliel da'acherem asura. Rabbi Gamliel didn't make it for himself. Others made it for him. He asked the non-Jew to make it, And even though, generally speaking, asking a non-Jew to do something for you is prohibited, but in this case, it's permitted because it was a mitzvah. That's what Tosfos says. So the Gemara says, Rav Yehuda da'acherem also v'armoi Shmuel Rav Yehuda shina sami eina didin sami eina didan. But is it really the case if others make it for you, it's permitted? But Rav Yehuda, others made him like a statue, and Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, take out the eye to destroy it. So to make it now look like the image of a man. So we see from here that even if though others made the moon for everyone, it should be prohibited. So the Gemara says, no, Hasam b'chotma boet. There, the case is that it was 3D. The image was jutting out, mishum chashada, and there was concern. She was concerned. He wanted people to think that Rav Yehuda was worshiping it, so he made it destroyed. So the Gemara says, once you have a ring that is jutting out, then you're prohibited to leave it around, but you're allowed to steal with it. You're not allowed to leave it around because people might think you're worshiping it, but you're allowed to sign with it because when you sign with it, the image is not jutting out. But if the signature or the ring part is recessed, people aren't going to think you're worshiping it. But also, you're not allowed to sign with it because when you sign something in that manner, then it becomes jutting out. So we see from here we're concerned about chshad. So the Gemara says, are we really concerned that people are going to suspect you? What about in the synagogue of Shafi Yosef and Hardar? He had a statue there. They prayed in front of it. They weren't concerned people would think they're worshiping it. Gemara says, no, that case is different. Rabbi Shani, there are a lot of people there, and since there are a lot of people there, nobody was concerned about it, that they were worshiping it. Everybody knew what was going on. Then the Gemara says, but Rabbi Gamliel had this move. Maybe people would think he's worshiping him, and he's only an individual. So the Gemara says, no. Since he's the Nasi, a lot of people are coming to see him, so there are a lot of people there. He buys him. Alternatively, another answer to Prakamavi. Rabbi Gamliel had the moon broken up into small different pieces, and he only combined them at the time where he's checking the witnesses. And every day he wouldn't be able to see it, so therefore there'd be no chashad, there'd be no suspicion. Then the Gemara gives another answer. That he kept it around to learn, even though you're not allowed to make a moon, but or even to have a moon, but to study from it, it's okay. The Tanya will Talmud, so you're not allowed to learn it to do it. Talomed will have no horos. You're allowed to study it to understand and to teach. So that's what Rabbi Shimon Gamliel was doing. He had it around Lahavinu Lahoros. This is the big leniency for us to be able to study certain topics, which the Torah says you're not allowed to study, but if it's for the purpose of Lahavinu Lahoros, to understand and to teach, then it would be permitted. So we'll come back to this in a moment. First, I'm going to finish up the Mishnah. Rashbag Omer. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel taught in our Mishnah that if the form on the utensil is honorable, then you can't. Then you have to. Then it's prohibited. But if it's not honorable, it's prohibited. It's permitted. So the Gemara says, "Ezri mechubaden, ve'ezri mevuzin." What's honored and what's not honored? I'm a Rav mechubada u'ma'al min hamayim. Mevuzin u'ma'al min hamayim. First approach is Rav says honored means if it's above the water in the pot. And not honored as if it's below the water. Shmuel says both of them are considered mevuzin if you're cooking with it. And these are the honored ones. Like on bracelets and rings and earrings, and that's the honored one. But on utensils, is not honored. And the non-honored ones that you could keep are the ones that are on the utensils and the sheets and the towels. Just want to read what the Aliba de Hilchasa says, is a controversial topic about here. It says here explicitly in our daf that you can't draw a sun or a moon. So what about people drawing a sun or a moon? Is that allowed? So here, let's see what it says here. Tzuros tzuros. And now Liba de Hilchasa also would say tzuros shemim b'dor shchina. You're not allowed to draw forms that are in the dwelling place of the Shechina, like the four faces together. And you also can't draw the seraphim and the ophanim and the angels. And also you can't draw a form of a face by itself. That's a little bit more controversial, but there are some who are very strict about that. All of these are prohibited to do, even if it's just for beauty. When is this the case? If it's 3D, but if it's just like flat, like you leave it on the garment, you're drawing on the wall, then you're allowed to do it. And the form of the moon, the stars, and the sun, then it's prohibited, whether it's boletes bein shokos, whether it juts out or whether it doesn't jut out. So the moon and the sun are always prohibited to draw. That's the Rambam, and that's the Shulchan Aruch. And the Raiva challenges this. It says, why is he drawing a distinction between the sun and the moon and everything else? It means everything else should also be prohibited in this manner. So anyway, it seems to me you're not allowed to draw the sun. But there are some heterim, like they asked Rav Moshe Feinstein about drawing a sun in a school project. The kid draws a sun. And so there the leniency is, look, it's not really, he didn't really draw the sun. He just drew this like sketch. It's nowhere near the sun. Nobody would ever confuse it for being the sun. But if you're a very sophisticated artist and you really want to draw the sun and the moon, that's going to be problematic. Okay, we'll stop here. Shakaya.